Hello, and welcome to Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Today's sermon is going to be entitled, Wrestling with God. Have you ever had those times where you just lay in bed and you just can't sleep because you're wrestling with something with God? Whether it's asking something you should or shouldn't do, or asking why something has happened to you, or asking life questions why something has happened to somebody else, those times when you wrestle with God. And it's okay to answer yes, that's not a trick question. Unless your life is far different from mine, you've had those times where you're crying out to God and asking why? Why, God? Or what should I do? I just want an answer. Those times where you wrestle with God. Well, I'm here to tell you that you're in good company, because David, a man after God's own heart, he also wrestled with God. Psalm 141, a psalm of David. Lord, I cry out to you. Make haste to help me. Give ear to my voice when I cry out to you. Let my prayers be set before you. Or how about this one? Psalms 35. This you have seen, O Lord. Do not keep silent. O Lord, do not be far from me. Stir up yourself and wake to my vindication, to my cause, my God and my Lord. Vindicate me, O Lord, my God, according to your righteousness. It's very likely, no matter who you are, you've heard the name Israel. Israel as a country, Israel as a nation state, Israel as a people group. The name Israel was given to Jacob, one man. His name was Jacob. He was given the name Israel. The name Israel means to wrestle with God. Jacob wrestled with a heavenly entity, and I won't get into, there's many different explanations of who or what that was, but after that wrestling, he was named Israel. He who wrestles with God. And that became the name given to all Israel as a people, as a group. So I would submit, if you said yes, you wrestle with God, there's not something wrong with you. There's something right with you. So I don't know about you, but I know for my own sake I can say, life is not always easy. And to where else would you go? To who else should you turn? God knows everything. God has the answers. God knows what's going on. Why would you go anywhere else? Not only did God make the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, He made you, and He knows you far better than you could ever know yourself. Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my laying down. You are acquainted with all my ways. There is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You have hedged me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? Let us reason some more on the last part of that psalm. If you don't go to God, if you don't wrestle with God, it's not like you're keeping anything from Him. There's no secrets from God. He knows. He knows what you're struggling with. He knows if you're angry. He knows if you're angry with Him. He knows if you're angry with someone else. He knows. So God already knows. It's not like it's a shock to Him. It's not like any of your thoughts, if you go to Him with them, are a surprise. God is not surprised by anything that you do. He knows it. He knows it before you know it. He knows it before you do it, before you think it. God is all-knowing. Now, I'm not going to go and read the entire story of Genesis and Moses and the people coming out of Egypt and wandering through the wilderness and getting to the promised land. But I will say in that there is a clear illustrations and archetypes for us to study. Moses goes to God and says, Why? Why, God, have you done this to me? Why have you laid me with all the burden and all the responsibility of all these people to provide for all these people? He goes to God, and we can say whether that's good or bad, but that's what he was struggling with. He had those issues. He felt overwhelmed, and he went to God. And you know what God did? God helped him. On the reverse, we see the people. They complained they didn't go to God with their complaints. They complained against God, complaining about not having any meat, complaining about wandering through the wilderness, complaining to each other about the circumstances that God had put them in, complaining about how big and strong the people were in the promised land that they had to defeat, and what happened when they did that. Instead of being in the wilderness for a short time, they were stuck in the wilderness going on 40 years. And they complained about not having meat. And God gave them meat, and then he struck them with a plague for their complaining. So I would submit, if that's an archetype, it's okay to go to God with your complaints, with your issues, when you're overwhelmed. It's not okay to complain against God to other people. For you'll find in Philippians chapter 2, it says, do all things without complaining. So we've talked about David. We've talked about Moses. We've talked about Jacob, who became Israel. How they all wrestled with God. Let us also look at Job, who wrestled with God. And let us look at our ultimate example, Jesus. Look at him when he's in the garden. Is he not wrestling? Is he not going to God? Saying, God, I need help. Asking for strength. Going to God with his issues. Saying, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Weeping. Jesus goes to God. Even Jesus had times when he wrestled. And he's our example. Now, if all these men in the Bible, these men recorded for us to study, wrestled with God and had hard times and went to God, what makes you think you'll be any different? There's a pretty famous poster of the Marine Corps, and it's got a drill instructor with a pretty angry face in the face of some Marine Corps recruit, and it says, we didn't promise you a rose garden. Now, I can tell you as a former Marine, the Marine Corps is not always rosy. Nobody joins the Marine Corps, at least nobody wise joins the Marine Corps thinking they're going to have an easy life. Like I would submit, nobody gives their life to God, or at least they shouldn't, expecting to have no problems and for everything to be rosy. Jesus himself says very plainly in John 16, in this life you will have trouble. That's not a may. He says, in this life you will have trouble. Jesus doesn't lie. Now at this point you may be thinking, preacher, the gospel is called the good news. This doesn't sound like good news. Well, here's the good news in a word. Jesus. Let's read the run of that passage. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Here's the good news. God, Jesus Christ, are far bigger than any problem you will ever face. Here's the good news. Jacob, who becomes Israel, which is to be said, he who wrestles with God. It is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Jacob was loved by God. After Jacob has that wrestling session, he is blessed abundantly. Job goes through a lot of trials if you read the story of Job. But what does it say at the end of Job? God blessed the later days of Job more than the first. Look at Jesus. He struggled in the garden. Jesus struggled far more and suffered far more than you have. Because if you're listening to this sermon, you haven't suffered unto death yet. But even Jesus, after that struggle, he rose from the dead. As it was recorded by Paul, he was given a name above every name and given authority over all things in heaven and on earth. Here's the good news. Those men who had those struggles, who went to God, not only were they delivered from them, they were blessed after it. Here's the good news. No matter what your problem is, God is bigger than your problem. And remember to have a right perspective. Don't ever think that God's keeping something from you. Instead, flip it around and think that everything that you have is a gift from God. God doesn't owe you anything. And though sometimes it doesn't feel like it, sometimes you can feel miserable. But try and remember that every breath in your lungs is a gift from God that you don't deserve. I'll tell a story. 3 men are in a town, hungry, destitute. They have nothing. They walk by a baker's shop. One man walks by and the baker looks out and can see that the man's hungry. He walks out and gives him 2 loaves of plain bread. And the man leaves. Another man walks by, smells the bakery, looks in at the baker. The baker comes out and gives him 3 big loaves. 1 regular, 1 wheat bread, 1 rye bread. A large variety. Another man just comes and sits on the steps, doesn't know what to do. The baker comes out and gives him 1 just wonderfully beautiful sweet loaf of raisin bread, covered in honey. You see, none of these men deserve that bread. None of these men could pay for that bread. That bread is a free gift. That bread, think of it as the days of your life. No matter what kind you've been given, it's a gift that you don't deserve. And it's okay to wrestle with God. I certainly do it. And sometimes I cry out, why is this happening to me? And God knows about it. He knows your innermost thoughts. He knows those things. And it's okay to go to Him with those things. But after that time of weeping, there may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning, it is written. After that, remember the right perspective, that God is gracious, the good news. God has many attributes. Wrath and justice, to name a few. But there's one attribute the Bible says that God is rich in. God is rich in mercy, and that's the good news. So I would submit there's plenty of scriptural basis for it to be okay to go to God and wrestle with God and ask God why. After all, we can never fully understand and fully know God. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are His thoughts above our thoughts. We can never fully understand in our limited being the fullness and beauty and awesomeness of God. And it's okay to go to Him with questions. And the good news, you have an advocate. You have a Savior, Jesus Christ. The good news, as we read in John 16. In this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. And keep it in perspective. Jesus gave recovery of sight to the blind. He cleansed lepers. And He rose men from the dead. So what's your problem? Jesus saved all them, and He can save you likewise. Thanks, and have a blessed day.